establishing or re-establishing trust after domestic violence has finished is really, really crucial for both parties, or for all parties who have been directly or indirectly affected. I think it's really important that people make a distinction between trust as a developmental stage when people are little people, as opposed to trust as a decision-making process with a process attached to it. So in simple terms, how do I go about establishing trust or placing trust as a decision, both in myself and in other parties? And often when I'm working with people, I talk about 4 approaches to trust, or 4 models, if you like, of trust. First one's that typically Western one, where I tell you something, you tell me something, I tell you something, you tell me something, in terms of about ourselves, and we get to know each other and develop a sense of trust, attachment over time. The second one I think of more as a trained form of trust, and it's really based on skills and competencies. And to use this example, you or I have done training in different parts of the world, and we've both learnt how to tie a specific sort of knot that can help the bridge that we're on by preventing it from falling into water far below. And regardless of the fact that we come from different countries and speak different languages, we've had the same basic training in how to tie that knot and prevent the bridge from falling into the water below, and in doing so, save both our necks. So that's a form of trust based on competency and skills. The third form of trust I often discuss with people is one that's probably more associated with the wild side, and that's a form of trust which comes out of an all or nothing type environment, where you get thrown a pound of whatever to sell, and the person says, "I love you, brother. I'll be back in a week to pick up the proceeds of your sales." And the person turns up a week later, the money's been ticked out or spent, and the other party says, "I don't love you anymore." And so that form of trust is typically business oriented. It's a trust that's based on codes and knowing specific rules, and what's done when those specific codes or rules are broken. And it's got a very black and white, all or nothing type ring to it. And the fourth form of trust that I'll often discuss when I'm speaking with people is one based on family trees. And that one's based on the sense that I knew your grandmother and your grandfather, I knew your aunties and uncles, I know some of your siblings. I have not met you individually, but I know the tree that you come from. And so, because I know the roots of that tree and the trunk of that tree and knew the leaves of that tree, I then accord to you the same sense of integrity in veneration that I would any other dimensions or aspects of that whole tree, until you prove otherwise. And so there are 4 varying forms of trust that you may or may not agree with, that you may not or may be aware of. What I do invite people to do is to be aware of the type or model of trust that they're operating from, how that works for them, and to distinguish or make a distinction from that developmental sense of trust when they're little, because they're not little anymore. And short of seeing a really good psychotherapist for a long time, they may not have the access to engage and explore that formative or former sense of trust and attachments. And so What wanting to encourage is a sense of them being able to identify how they are within themselves and to own that as quickly as possible so they actually can start doing something with it. To males, will often state that it's very difficult to paint a vehicle unless it's in your own spray booth, meaning that unless your feelings are fully functional, operating in your own body, in your own system, and you're able to own and register and acknowledge and work with those feelings in a day-to-day sense, then it's very, very difficult to change anything. And so trust within domestic violence is a very, very important feature to either reclaim or to help develop in a working sense of being able to identify issues between people as opposed to problems, being able to accept people into one's own not only heart space but personal space, and in the sense of being able to learn, give and take, and in time sharing around bridging to other people and around benefiting from being around other people, both personally, interpersonally and socially. All, of course, which are quite opposite to domestic violence, which rewards people separation and punishes connection. And so it's little wonder that many prison cells within countries throughout the world are filled with survivors of domestic violence who continue to maintain a theme of being rewarded through separation and being punished for connection, because at unlocked time is when the deals get done. Unlocked time is when the hits get done. Unlocked time is the opportunity in which to exploit the environment and people in the environment to meet one's own ends, irrespective or regardless of what those ends may be. And so it's important to recognise the place of trust for both survivors and perpetrators within domestic violence. On that theme, the other factor that's really important in relation to there being two halves of a house is that all too often it's easy not to own the psychological violence, the mind games, the this, that, because when emergency services arrive, they see the consequences typically of extreme physical violence. What they don't necessarily pay heed or witness to are the other forms of violence that have been contributed, that have led up to other physical form of violence being acted out. And so it's really, really important that people get validated for surviving domestic violence, because it's important that they know that the decisions they made, albeit small, all contributed to where they are today. And that is for people who've managed to leave or escape with their lives, that they're still alive. For some, that's small consolation, given the sacrifices they've made to get to where they are, because they may be missing children, both in the sense of having separated, and further forms of domination have been acted out through the law courts. And so children may have decided to go and live with the other party or parties, and of course in the extreme situations where they're left with one or two or three or more, less children, because of the violence acted out on their family system. And it's probably timely to mention that horror associated with warfare, where there is no shelter and no refuge at all, and the noises and the shock and the blood and the gore don't stop. And so the horror-stricken situations of terror that many people around the world are still in and that version of domestic violence that's become not only localised and regionalised, but which has dominated the entire country. And where domestic violence may be perceived as being a little residential home in the suburbs, their form of domestic violence in terms of domiciliary and where they live spans from border to border. And so it's really important to maintain a perspective of that form of domestic violence and what you and we can do to help those people out. So trust then is a really, really important issue. It's a fundamental issue in terms of people learning to break intergenerational cycles of violence, to stop and prevent future generations from continuing the same. And the trust is as much about people having courage to own their own portion, to own the part that they've done, to own the part that they've contributed in order to do something about it. There are some philosophies or theories out there that say that we're all simply conditioning and that it's a waste of time owning anything because at the end of the day, we're all connected to it anyway. Those ideologies are fantastic when surrounded by everyone else who has the same ideologies and the practices that inform them, where they tend to hit a wall in particularly domestic violence is the sense that there's no acknowledgement of personhood. There's no acknowledgement of the damage that's been done by the violence. And there's no acknowledgement of the sense that not only is disconnection being caused through the impact of the violence itself, it's undermining people's ability to establish identity and to know who they are, to learn who they are, to celebrate who they are. And so of crucial importance is the encouragement of trust and processes for recovering from domestic violence and having a sense of being able to develop a future or forward-looking orientation, direction in life, so that the old scripts, the old movie reel, where things are playing over and over and over again and continuing to cause havoc, continuing to anchor the seeds of dissent or leave behind the residue of fear and shame, worked through and gone beyond in order to develop a future goals, and means of communicating and problem solving in the world that not only help get needs met, but help pick up on those potentials that were slowed down or undermined during the periods of time in which the violence was being done or witnessed. So trust is a really important issue in relation to working with domestic violence. Trusting your instinct, trusting your puku, your tummy, when your solar plexus tells you that something's wrong, that you listen to it, and learning to re-listen to yourself in a deeper way, where it's now safe to do that, and it's now safe for you to own who you are, to engage who you are, and to start making decisions from a place that are heartfelt, where the love that you've had for your children, your wider family system, can be reignited and reclaimed and embraced, because the greatest feature that gets undermined when trust gets downtrodden and undermined is the capacity to attach, the capacity to develop unconditional acceptance, the capacity to love each other. And it's only in loving each other and having love for yourself in that sense that you will get through the mire that's associated with domestic violence. So I just want to reinforce the sense That trust is about knowing where you stand. It's about knowing where you stand within yourself. It's about knowing where you stand with yourself. It's about knowing where you stand with other people, so that the unpredictability that was brought about in the environment that you were living in with violence is made predictable, so that you can make decisions that are based on solid ground, that you can make and express choices that are based on knowing what's going to be done next, and how you're going to take part in that, rather than being in an environment where you are constantly reacting to unpredictability, where there's fear, and the fear is informing a sense of shame, and the shame is informing a sense of there's something wrong with me, I'm not protecting our children, and the powerlessness associated with that is informing I don't want anyone else to know because I've failed. So it's really, really important to trust in yourself, and sometimes that means telling stories that are hard to tell. Sometimes it means putting words to experiences that other people express discomfort in listening to. So I remember a man telling me the story of meditating in a paddock, and meditating in the paddock amongst sunflowers, and having been there for a couple of hours, and saying that in his heart of hearts he closed his eyes and saw an image of an ancestor who had a facial tattoo, and who said to him, you have to have courage and vigilance to follow the path of the warrior. And so, in reiterating that short story, you've got to have courage and vigilance, courage to heal, courage to go out on the pathway of a new journey, not knowing necessarily what's around the corner, and vigilance in terms of being watchful, to watch out for your children and to continue doing that, to realise that the attempts or efforts that you made in the past weren't in vain. You did the best you were able to do. And also to have a sense of, now that some of the other pressures have been alleviated or lifted off your shoulders, that you continue to be the best parent that you were being anyway, by remaining watchful, by remaining vigilant, by recognising that there's no longer a 4-to-2 ratio in the house. It's now 4-to-1. And so when you or I are the remaining parent, then there's 4 little people, or not 2 little people, who want to gain access to you and I and share their lives. Where you or I are out, where you or I are in the shower, when you or I are doing what we'd otherwise do, the ratio becomes 4-to-0. And so it's really important in terms of re-establishing, reclaiming, or just developing trust after domestic violence, to surround yourself with people who are safe, who you can let in, who you can share your fears with, but also your dreams with, and who you can tell it in terms of your story, just the way it is, without editing it.